Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. Of course, we are taking a look back at the week that was in Washington, D.C., doing it through the lens of this second Trump administration, and a lot, once again, even with Congress out of town for the Easter recess, lots to talk about here on this edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. And joining me here, we're going to do a two-man edition of the show, the two-man edition of the podcast, if you're listening to us on audio only. A CBN News Quick Start podcast host Dan Andros joining me this week. David Brody taking a week off, some much needed break. Dan, good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great, John.
It is good to see you, my friend. And let's start off with the new political football of the week, and that is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. This, of course, is an El Salvadorian immigrant who has been living in Maryland since he entered the country illegally in 2011. In 2019, a judge granted him permission to stay in the country legally, deeming it was too dangerous for him to go back to his homeland. Now, you have two sides of this story of this gentleman who was deported by the U.S. The White House has admitted that they mistakenly deported him to an El Salvadorian prison, along with a number of other criminals and others who were in the country illegally. The White House says many, if not most of them, were gang related. But the government has claimed that Abrego Garcia is linked to the El Salvadorian gang MS-13. His attorneys deny this. Abrego Garcia has not been charged with any crime here in the United States. His case is also separate from the one. Oh, I'm going to get to that in just a second. But his case it appears to be separate from the other criminals who were taken from the United States and moved to this El Salvadorian prison. Of course, the White House is pushing back on all of that. They say he is a criminal, that he was an MS-13 terrorist, and because our government lists MS-13 as a foreign terrorist organization, calling him a terrorist, and they maintain that he was in the country illegally. So, Dan, you've got the one side, you've got the White House and the president of El Salvador saying we do not plan to send him back to the United States, despite a Supreme Court order demanding that the U.S. facilitate his return to the United States. And then you've got the family and friends and the lawyers of Abrego Garcia saying that he had been a law-abiding citizen and a judge allowed him to stay in the country since 2019. Let's just jump in with both feet here. What are your thoughts on this situation here as we record this on Thursday morning?
Well, you have to sift a lot through kind of everything, all the narratives and everything that's being spun in the media. You know, you've got senators coming out of the woodwork to try to free him and like make this like a, cause du jour. And so you've got to sift through all of that stuff. And we talk about him and it's mentioned that, he's been living here and he's free of a criminal record. Well, except for coming here illegally. So that's kind of an issue. And it's interesting to me, John, that the reason why that 2019 ruling was that he could stay was because they said that returning him to El Salvador posed a, quote, significant risk due to what? Potential gang-related persecution. So my question is, if he's not part of a gang, what is he worried about gang retaliation for? So that seems to be conflicting. But I think all of this hinges, John, on whether or not he actually is in this gang. Now, they're denying that at this point. But in that 2019 ruling, there was a confidential informant that said he was. And so, and along with other circumstantial evidence on that. So is that enough evidence? I mean, I think that's where you have to kind of really zoom in on this case and look at it. And beyond that, I mean, I think there's a lot of just grandstanding and things of that nature. I also think it's kind of amusing to look at the press. You can always see which side of the narrative, a media outlet's on when you describe someone as just a Maryland father. Technically true, I guess, but you could say an illegal immigrant. Now we're seeing these police reports of him clearly being abusive, physically abusive to his wife, who's now trying to advocate for him. So the whole thing is just odd. And it is also odd to me, John, that people like Senator Chris Van Hollen, who is someone who I don't even know if people would be able to name him as a senator. He's not exactly one of the more well-known senators in the country, but decided to kind of make his big foray into the media this case when it's so unclear and muddy, and you have two sides disputing this thing, and it's an odd political risk that that someone would take. So it's interesting to watch all this play out, but there's a lot of stuff to sift through when you're reading media reports.
Right, and Senator Van Hollen obviously represents the state that that Abrego Garcia is from. So a feeling, I guess, like he has to stick up for a Maryland citizen. And you're right. The Democrats and his lawyers and his family members simply refer to him as a Maryland man, and we're seeing a lot of pushback on that because there's certainly more to the story there. I agree with you that a big part of this has to do with whether or not he is in a gang. But to me, the larger point is, was he in the country legally? He did come into the country illegally back in 2011. There's no disputing that. Even his lawyers won't dispute that. The question is, regardless of the reason for why this judge in 2019 said that he could stay in the United States, the ruling was that he could stay, which I'm not a legal expert, but in my mind, that makes him a resident of the United States at that point. It kind of supersedes the fact that he came into the country illegally in 2011. So while I don't claim to speak with any authority on that, that's the argument that you're hearing from his lawyers, from his family, and from his side. But your point is well taken. If there is a concern, was he a gang member in El Salvador before he came here, but has not been part of a gang here since coming to the United States? We haven't really gotten any clarity on that. There's still a lot of details about this, and each side seems to be kind of cherry picking the information to buttress their own case here. And so we are left trying to figure out what's right, what's the situation. To me, Dan, it seems like if he was in the country at this point after 2019 legally, then there should be a system in place to determine whether he should be deported from the country or whether or not the 2019 ruling should remain in effect and he should be deported. But once you've been granted permission to stay in the United States, and again, neither of us are legal authorities on this, but that to me is the big question to answer. What are his rights? As someone who'd been living in this country, meeting with ICE on a yearly basis, what are his rights if this judge in 2019 said that he was not to be deported back to El Salvador? And that's the question I haven't heard anybody answer appropriately.
Well, and then also, like, do you have the same rights if you get this stay, even if you get this ruling? Does that make you an American citizen? I mean, he's still not an American citizen, so does he have the same rights? And so it gets very complicated. And the Trump administration did admit, they did say, like, well, this was a clerical error. That he was, in this, that he was deported and sent to El Salvador. So, but then at the same time, like Carolyn Levitt, the administration, they're doubling down and just saying he's not coming back. We're not bringing him back. Now, if El Salvador wants to bring him back, like you said, though, that the president there said he's not doing it. But the Trump administration did say, well, if they decide to send him back, then we'll provide the plane, we'll bring him back. But it just they don't think that's happening. And it doesn't look like it's happening. And so, yeah, a lot of questions to be answered on it. And again, when you watch, I'm always just careful on like how people frame things, because these days you got to sift through all this stuff to get to, okay, well, what are the actual facts that we're hinging this thing on? What are we waiting for? And like you said, like what are the legal actual ramifications, that experts can kind of point out and that the courts can battle out about that 2019 ruling. And what is the evidence? What can we actually learn tangibly about him being in MS-13? The court case there also kind of seemed to indicate that he was. So a lot of questions to answer, but again, you got to sift through all the madness to get there.
Yeah, to your point, the supporters calling him Maryland man, clearly more to it than that. And I also think just calling him he's a terrorist is also going too far on the other extreme on the right. As always, we try to find the nuance here, navigating Trump 2.0 and get to the heart of what's actually going on here. I will say at the White House, at a hastily called White House briefing on Wednesday, late in the day, Caroline Levitt was joined at the podium by Patty Morin. She is the mother of Rachel Morin, a mother, 34-year-old mother who was raped and murdered by a fugitive from El Salvador back in 2023. Now, she was raped and murdered not by Abrego Garcia, but by a different El Salvadorian illegal immigrant who was in the country. And they're making the case that it's not just about Abrego Garcia. What they are trying to do is make America safer, and they pointed to the case of Rachel Morin, of course, as a tragic murder, and that this person, these people being in the country, people who are in the country illegally in gangs committing violent crimes, that we should be doing everything we can to get them out of the country and get them back where they came from. I don't think, Dan, there's a person alive who doesn't agree with that sentiment, right? Get the dangerous people who are in the country illegally out of the country. And I know at one point it got very emotional. Patty Morin was urging the press, please tell the truth. Tell the truth about what's happening out there, because it is a heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching story. But I do want to make sure that people don't think that Abrego Garcia and Patty Morin, that it's the same case, right? I mean, it's kind of the same topic, but they're two different branches of the same story.
Yeah, and this mom here is pointing out too. We were talking about Senator Van Hollen, and her point is, hey, he never said anything to me when this happened. I never got a call from him. There was never any concern this side. So that's one of the reasons. I mean, from Maryland, obviously, in the same state. So how come she didn't hear from him? But yeah, it's you don't want to conflate those two. But the problem is, I think, like you said, hopefully one all people could agree on. But with the border situation and so many people, the border being so porous, you just have a numbers situation going on here. The more people are able to flood through the borders, the more bad guys you're going to get coming through the borders too. Yeah, a lot of them, and I don't know what the exact percentage is. Nobody knows what the exact percentage is. But what we do know is the more porous the borders are, the more bad guys you're going to let into the country. And we've seen the results of that, and it's just horrific to see some of these crimes and see some of these people who have been senselessly killed.
Right.
That hope that if the border situation was different, perhaps some of these could have been averted.
Last thing on this, and I think this story isn't going anywhere for a long while because it is such a hot button political story. And these kinds of stories come around every so often. I remember Elian Gonzalez, that case dominated the headlines for months and months and months. And it was obviously a different kind of story than this, but similar to the type of a way a person can become a political football on both sides. And certainly the Trump administration knows that this is a winning argument for them. Strong on the borders. His polling numbers are very strong when it comes to immigration, when it comes to border security. And this plays into that. This plays into the no nonsense approach. We're just going to get the bad guys out, and that's that. And everybody's going to be safer, and they're going to thank us for it at the end of the day. Democrats have had a hard time beating that back, and understandably so, but they seem to be planting a flag in the ground on this particular story and in this particular case, because they see it as an abuse of power. They see this as Trump's immigration policies going too far. They see this as an innocent man getting caught up in everything the Trump administration is trying to do, and now languishing in a maximum security prison filled with gang members in El Salvador. So you're going to see the Democrats like Van Hollen, like Ocasio-Cortez, and others really pushing hard on this, because they are trying to find a way to chisel at Trump's support with regards to immigration and border security. Dan, the question is, do you think it'll work?
Well, look, it's going to be their. I think you're right on their strategy. I think the problem with that is it all hinges on the character of this guy. Like, this is the guy they've picked out of everybody, and so if this guy does turn out, if they can find further evidence of the MS-13 connections and that he's a gang member, you already see the police reports of him beating his wife. And even if that's unrelated, it's like you are putting this guy out there like he's, like you said, Maryland man, Maryland dad. You're putting him out as a sympathetic figure. And if he's got this checkered past, it's not going to work.
Next thing I wanted to talk about is the Trump administration denying Harvard $2 billion in federal funds. It's part of their ongoing efforts to make colleges and universities, who were at the top of the news last year with all of the anti-Semitic protests, some of the vile protests going on college campuses across the country, at places like Columbia, at places like Harvard. The Trump administration, one of the first things they've done here in their first few months in office is threatened to withhold federal dollars, grant money to these different colleges and universities, unless they put policies in place making sure that their campuses are safe for all students, including Jewish students who felt totally unsafe by the end of by at different points last year when all these protests were going on. And so now Harvard has said, we are not going to let the Trump administration, what they say is, bully us into making changes. We will make the changes on our own that we decide we want to make, and we're not going to kowtow to the Trump administration and make decisions based on them withholding money from us. So the Trump administration said, okay, $2 billion. We're keeping it. And so now there's going to be this back and forth between Harvard and the Trump administration. But also, Dan, you wonder what this means for other colleges and universities. Will they go the route of some of the other colleges and universities that have decided to work with the Trump administration, or will they try to remain independent and risk losing millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and in the case of Harvard, billions of dollars in federal funding?
Yeah, and this is a couple things here. One, I just, looking up, just seeing information on the story as it's come across the news, that Harvard has like a $50 billion endowment fund. And so part of me is like, why are they even needing any federal dollars in the first place at all? I mean, you throw that 50 billion in an ING account. Does ING even exist anymore?
I don't know.
Just a basic interest account. I mean, you get a couple percent. I mean, you're getting hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Like, you could probably send everyone there for free that gets accepted in there. So I don't understand how that all works in the first place. But this to me is the problem, John, when you as a university tie any of your reliance to the federal government. You then are at the whim of what the federal government decides. I don't see how this is much different than during the Biden administration or previous Democratic administrations kind of pressuring universities into the bathroom situation. If you don't have a gender neutral bathroom or a trans bathroom or whatever they decided in that case, that, men can use women's bathrooms and vice versa, or else you're going to lose federal funding. We're going to call it sex discrimination. We'll come up with something and we're going to remove that funding. Well, if you make yourself dependent on the federal government, you are also then putting yourself kind of in a position where they can essentially blackmail you. They can just say, well, sorry, if you don't do it, no more money for you. And so that's sort of the playing field that has been set up in the past few years. And on some of these gender issues, the Biden administration was pushing universities on that. And so now here, Trump's just doing essentially the same thing, the Trump administration, but they're doing it with anti-Semitism. And there's clearly a problem, particularly at these Ivy League universities, with the anti-Semitism on campus and what we saw after October 7th, not long after it, all these protests and the support for even Hamas in some instances, which is incredibly disturbing. So it's kind of, to me, like the Democrats sort of helped start this trend. And here's the Trump administration sort of doing the same thing, but on a different issue.
Right. I mean, and then you made the point, and I think it's the right one. Anytime you are beholden to the government for any kind of funding, you're at the risk of losing that funding if there's an administration change, or you're doing something the government doesn't want you to do, or you're not doing something the government wants you to do. Now, it sounds like you said with Harvard, they have enough money that they can probably absorb the hit of $2 billion and they can make this fight. There are a lot of colleges and universities that may not be able to absorb a hit like that. And I do know that sometimes a government agency will approach a university about doing some kind of a study or some kind of research. Like it's not always the college or university asking the government to give them money to conduct research. Sometimes it's going the other way. And if that's the case, if some of these programs are the government going to the university and saying, we will give you $50 million to conduct this cancer trial at your medical school or something like that, those kinds of things happen quite a bit. But there is always that inherent danger of when you link your financial well-being to the federal government. The federal government can exercise its independence and say, listen, you're going to do this our way, or we're going to withhold the funds. And in the case of Harvard, at least, it sounds like they're willing to take the hit and in order to maintain their independence. And which I got to say, I think more universities and more colleges should be acting independently. And then you can make the judgment as someone who is a father or a student, whether or not you want to attend that university, whether or not you want to go to that school, whether or not you want to transfer from that school. But at the bottom line, in terms of health and safety at a college campus, it shouldn't have anything to do with government funding. It shouldn't have anything to do with every college campus and university should be safe for all of its students. And that's the bottom line. And I am hoping, I don't know what Harvard's thoughts are on this, but I am hoping that even if Harvard continues on and relinquishes the $2 billion and says, okay, fine, we won't take it, that they still go forward with policies that will make it safe for Jewish students on campus.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That should be a no-brainer. And, you know, colleges and universities are supposed to be the place where you're pursuing ideas, you're discussing and debating things. And it seems like, John, in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, maybe or so, that it's kind of shifted into this mode of you see these people that don't want a differing view on there, particularly a conservative view. You see Ben Shapiro famously going to campuses and getting shouted down, and you see Riley Gaines even, I think that happened to as well. You know, a conservative goes on these campuses, and it's like, even if you disagree with them, what are you doing here? Just trying to silence the opposing speech. You see them come out with bullhorns a lot of times, just yell and be obnoxious and make noises, and it's like, what kind of an atmosphere are these universities fostering where they don't want to just hear, you know, I know, John, when I want to discuss something with somebody or I'm going to be on a segment, I want to know what the other side's best arguments are. I don't want to just sit there and yell at you and make you be quiet and silence you. Like how does that serve anyone? That's just bullying and that's just intimidation. So, I mean, and I thought that colleges and universities were supposed to be sort of the prime ground for these sorts of conversations and intellectual discussions, but it seems like it's going in the opposite direction.
Well, colleges and universities have always been at the forefront of protests in the country. Some of them good civil rights protests. You know, depending on how, I mean, the Vietnam War was before our time, but most of the Vietnam War protests began on college campuses. And I would even argue, I mean, I think anybody who watches or listens to CBN knows that we are supportive of Israel. But I mean, even if you are someone on a college campus that you don't like the way Israel is conducting something, I don't have a problem with a protest of Israel's policies. What I do have a problem with is promoting Hamas, which I do have a problem with is making Jewish students feel like their lives are in danger, that they're being personally attacked. I mean, there should be an ability for liberals, conservatives, people in the middle to voice their concerns and their ideas. It's the First Amendment. It's freedom of speech, where we should be allowed to say something at the top of our voice that would make someone on the other side at the top of their voice yell against us. And not in a combative way, but in a way that we're expressing our opinions. The college campuses should allow for that, but it also has to allow for both sides to have an airing. It has to not promote violence. It has to not make people feel unsafe. And that's where I think a lot of these colleges and universities really went off the rails. They offered no kind of guidance and no restrictions on what these protests were looking like.
Yeah, no, it doesn't seem like a lot of people in the administrations of these universities have a backbone or have a spine. And are willing to stand, even if they disagree, like you said, even if they're not fans of Israel and they criticize everything they do, you have to have a spine and stand up and say they have a right to say that. And I would hope that conservatives on the other side would say, you know what, you have a right to say that. I'm just going to disagree with you on that and tell you why. And we're going to talk about that. But yeah, it doesn't seem like there's an appetite for that right now.
No, there certainly, we have a very difficult time having constructive debate in the United States right now. But we do see people who are trying to engage in debate on college campuses and elsewhere in a respectful way. That, of course, is a two-way street, and it's very infrequent you get both sides who are willing to engage in a debate like that. Last thing to get to here on this episode, Dan, President Trump reportedly convinced Israel at some point in the last couple of weeks to hold off on attacking Iran's nuclear program. We know the Trump administration has been engaging in discussions with Iran over its nuclear program. Last weekend, they had their first round of discussions. Another round is coming up in Rome. And it looks as though, Dan, at least according to this New York Times report that came out on Thursday, that the Trump administration urged Israel not to go forward with an attack on Iran's nuclear program. Now, the Trump administration has said if these negotiations don't go forward, the military is next, and they will absolutely do that through the Israeli military. Israel has been making plans for this. They have, I would imagine, hundreds of plans ready to go at a moment's notice to conduct an operation like this. But wanted to get your thoughts on the Trump administration trying one last time, it seems, to convince Iran to give up its nuclear program. Again, this is a Trump administration that in the first administration ended the Obama administration's Iran nuclear talks, and the critics argue put back efforts to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. So it's very interesting that we are here in this moment right now. What is your take on this?
Well, my first thought, John, is this. I can't help but think we just came off talking about anti-Semitism a little bit. And, one of the critiques that you hear from the crowd, the anti-Semitic sort of crowd, is that Israel is controlling America. Now, I just want to know how, if Israel is controlling America, President Trump is able to convince them to not do an attack. Just right. A question I have for the anti-Semites out there who think that that Israel controls everything. Just perhaps someone has an explanation for that one. But I do think, listen, this is kind of consistent with, Trump talking about wanting to end the Ukraine and Russia conflict, and going and pursuing these sort of things in a diplomatic way instead of just being immediately let's go to the military. So I think that there's some consistency showing there. Of course, the concern is, will Iran say, okay, we'll talk, and then they just kind of keep talking and they keep staggering it out, they keep dragging it out, sort of like North Korea did, and then, oh, whoops, well, we've got nuclear weapons, so sorry, no more talks for you. Hopefully, between the U.S. and Israeli intelligence, they have a firm handle on the actual progress and actually how much time they have before they are fully capable of nuclear weapons there in Iran. Hopefully they have a good sense on that. And so they're like, wait a minute, we've got a little runway here. Let's try this and let's see if we can do it. And the way that both Netanyahu and Trump, particularly Netanyahu, said would work, that these negotiations would be if you did it in a fashion that 2003 Libya sort of fashion, where it was disarmament, U.S. troops go in there, they take out the components, destroy some of them, remove them, and make sure that they have no capability of doing that. Because as we've seen, John, Iran is very clear in their stated goal that they want to wipe Israel off the map. This is not a secret.
Right.
This is something we know. They've now crossed a red line of attacking openly Israel a couple of times now in the last couple of years. So they've shown their willingness to do that. And if they had a nuclear weapon, Lord knows what they would do with that. And so hopefully they just are calculating, okay, we've got some time here and maybe we can go in and do this. But like you said, if Trump's willing to he's willing to green light this operation here with our partners, if there doesn't seem to be any progress on that front.
And just to wrap this up, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement on Thursday morning in response. It seems as though it's in response to the New York Times article. It does not directly refer to the New York Times article, but it said the Prime Minister has led countless overt and covert operations in the campaign against Iran's nuclear program. It is only due to those operations that Iran does not currently possess a nuclear arsenal. He says these actions have delayed Iran's nuclear program by approximately a decade, and thanks to Prime Minister Netanyahu's persistence, withstanding great opposition both at home and abroad to his vigorous policy toward Iran. The Prime Minister has made clear more than once Israel will not allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons. So that to me reads, Benjamin Netanyahu is saying we still will control when we attack. So I don't know if it's an outright refuting of the New York Times article, but it seems to say we are still going to be in charge. We will still decide when we go forward with something because we've been at the forefront of this for 15, 20 years, however long it's been.
Yeah. And look, I mean, while I'm sure Israel in agreeing to delay the attacks here, I'm sure that came after, I'm sure, discussions between Trump and Netanyahu and hearing him out. But make no mistake, Israel, when they feel that their existence is being threatened, they will act whether they have the support of the U.S. or others or not. They're going to act, and they've shown that they will do what they have to do, or they feel they have to do militarily to ensure that they don't get obliterated. So they will do that. And so yeah, that message makes sense.
Well, as we wrap up this edition of Navigating Trump 2.0, we do it on Holy Thursday. We wanted to just take a quick moment to wish everyone a solemn Good Friday, I guess, because it is certainly a day where we set aside a portion of our day to remember the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross on Good Friday. But then we look forward to Easter Sunday, and certainly we wanted to wish everyone watching and everyone listening a very happy Easter in celebration of the resurrection. So from everybody here at Navigating Trump 2.0, we wish you all a happy Easter. In the meantime, until next week, Dan, thanks for joining me here on Navigating Trump 2.0.
All right, thanks, John.